Hello, welcome to my channel. I've been running my YouTube channel as a kind of music-related channel for about a year and a quarter now. And it all started in the fall of 2024 when I decided to learn to play every Beatles song written and to play them on guitar, of which I have many. This is one of my guitars. And to play and sing the song, and sometimes, harmonize with it, sometimes add other elements. But basically to learn how to play every single Beatles song ever written. And there are close to 200 of them. And so in a previous video, I talked about what I learned from that experience. But now I want to talk about how I did this, in case anybody wants to take on this challenge. So the first thing that I recommend is that you get this book. It's called the Beatles Complete Chord Songbook. And there are quite a few Beatles songbooks out there, but I think this is the best one, the most comprehensive, and the easiest to use. It's published by Hal Leonard, which is a very well-known publisher of songbooks, music books. And if you look at just a typical page, you'll see it's got the song title, it's got the lyrics, all on one page, which makes it very easy to use for the most part. I mean, there are a few songs that go over 2 pages, but most of them are covered within 2 pages. So you can open it up to the song and play the whole song without turning the page. It has the chords. So just the basic chords. So if you are a guitar player or a piano player and you know the chords, you can just play along with this in front of you. So it makes it easier to learn. Of course, you have to know the songs before. I don't think you can learn the song just by looking at this. That doesn't give you enough information. So obviously you have to know the song. You have to have the melody in your head, and you have to have some knowledge of playing music, either guitar or piano. I think guitar is kind of the best because I do play piano, but I think guitar just kind of lends itself better to playing most of these songs. Some of them were meant for piano. And if you really want a challenge, you can try learning some of the Paul songs that he wrote on piano, such as Lady Madonna. But for the most part, these songs can all be played and sung with an acoustic guitar. So how do you go about this is the question. In my case, I knew almost all of these songs. At least I had them in my head because I'd been listening to Beatles songs, been listening to Beatles albums, been collecting Beatles albums since I was a little kid. So I think by the time I was 12, I had basically all of the Beatles albums, maybe the American versions because I'm American for some of them. But I basically had all of the Beatles albums. By the age of 12, I listened repeatedly to these albums. So my training started early. But if you don't, obviously you don't have to have all the Beatles songs in your head to undertake this project. It can be a learning experience. So let's say that you know some Beatles songs and are familiar with some of the albums, but not everything. There's still a method and a procedure by which you can methodically go through and learn the songs. Now, one way to do it, and the way that I did it, because I knew all the songs already, it made sense for me to do it this way. I did it alphabetically. So you just basically run through the book from A to Z. And I'll tell you my basic procedure. And some of these songs I already knew how to play because I've been playing guitar and piano for many decades, and a lot of the songs that I've played over the years have been Beatles songs. So I was familiar with quite a few of them, and that made it easy for me to, or relatively speaking, to go through the book at a pretty good pace. I would say I was averaging about 3 songs a day. And as I mentioned in previous videos about this project, it probably took me about a half hour of work to record each song. So maybe an hour and a half a day for 2 to 3 months. It was a pretty big commitment of time, but because I put maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours a day of playing music anyway into my daily schedule, it wasn't a huge sacrifice of my time. I was already using that time to learn and play music, so I just focused intensely on Beatles music for 3 months. And I would take a song, I would study the chord progressions, and usually what I did was sometimes, but not all the time, because like I said, I have a lot of these songs in my head already. I can almost play them, and hear them playing in my head. So I would sit down and go through the song carefully, looking at all the chord changes, trying to see if there was anything tricky. And there's always a few tricky things in a Beatles song. Nothing is totally straightforward. That was one of my big takeaways, is that each song has its own little kind of unique fingerprint. Each song has its little kind of charms and hooks and very special chord changes or melodies, or melodies over the chord changes. But basically, the Beatles songs, conform to the standards of pop songs. So you have verses and you have choruses, and you just need to learn the order. If you want to replicate the song in its entirety as best you can with a guitar, you need to learn the precise order of the verse, the chorus. There might be a bridge. There might be 2 bridges. And again, all of that is labeled very clearly in this book. So what I would do is I would sit down with my guitar. I would get it into the right tuning. Usually I tried to get to the same tuning as the original song. Sometimes I would change the tuning just because maybe my voice didn't fit that tuning, especially with some of the Paul songs that are so high. You either have to sing them an octave lower or you change the key. With almost all the John songs I can sing, because my voice is pretty, similar to John's in terms of its range. But Paul is more difficult. So you have to choose the key, and hopefully it's going to be the same key that they performed it in. Here we have Across the Universe as an example. And it's in the key of D, but it says tune the guitar down 1 semitone. So if you want to be precise, you would tune the guitar down 1 semitone, but it's not necessary. It might help sing the song, because that means that you're singing at a slightly lower key. Not all of the information, like I said, is in this book. This book definitely simplifies the songs. It's not going to give you all of the information to play the riffs, although some of that is in here. But if you want to learn the riff, you probably are going to go on YouTube, as a lot of people do these days, and find somebody who's teaching that riff, and then just learn it, and then incorporate it into the song. Or you can just choose to play it without the riff. I think we sometimes go a little too far in trying to be faithful to the original song, rather than singing it in the spirit of the song, or maybe kind of creating your own version of the song. So it's really up to you to decide how faithful you want to be, how much of the riffs and the guitar work you want to learn while you're going through this process. But in this case, Across the Universe, not too difficult. The verses are D, B minor, F minor, E minor, A, D, which is kind of a standard. You could say it's even kind of a jazz progression. It's definitely a very common chord progression that you're going to see in 20th century popular music, which the Beatles, had absorbed, right, as they started building their song repertoire. So you have D, B minor, F sharp minor, E minor 7th, A 7th, D, B minor, F sharp minor, E minor 7th, G minor. Little trick there. See, that's where they put in their little hooks, which is the fourth minor, right? So words are flowing out like endless rain into a paper cup. They slither wildly as they slip away across the universe. Pools of sorrow, waves of joy are drifting through my open mind, possessing and caressing me. That's the fourth minor, which the Beatles were very fond of using, which is a very kind of plaintive, longing type of feeling that desperately wants to get back home to the original key. So they're a little, you have to learn those little bits that the Beatles threw in that might slightly subvert the standard chord progressions that they were drawing from. So they're always going to be diverging a little bit and giving you a little hook, something, I've never heard that before. That's interesting. And I think that's one of the charms and part of the genius of the Beatles' songwriting. So you learn the verse, and usually the verses stay the same. There might be very slight modifications, but usually the verses stay the same, so you have to figure out how they progress. Then you learn the chorus, in this case, D, A7, A, G, D. So it's basically a 1, 5, 4, 1 progression, which again is very, very simple, very standard, very common chord progression in popular music. So nothing tricky about that. And then verse 2 is basically the same, but you don't have the G minor part that you had in verse 1. So you just have to watch out that it's going to be a little bit different. Chorus 2 is the same as chorus 1, basically. And then verse 3 also has that little tricky fourth minor back to the original key, the first. And then there's kind of there's a third chorus, which again is the same, and then an outro. So the outros are also where the song is fading out. Those the Beatles were also very adept with their outros. So their outros are very intentional, and you have to get those down as well. And the outro for this is very simple. It's just fading out on a D. Jai Guru Deva. And you just kind of keep repeating that until you get tired of it and end the song. So a lot of their songs, I'm not going to say formulaic, but they draw upon very standard formulas of songwriting. Pop songwriting coming out of the Brill Building, coming out of Tin Pan Alley, coming out of the British music hall tradition, whatever, R&B music, the blues, whatever traditions they were drawing from, they then make some very subtle yet very effective changes and introduce some variations, which just makes it interesting, endlessly interesting. Kind of, I would liken it in a bit to to the way Mozart wrote music. There were always these little, variations and places, little surprising places where you thought it was going to go some way, and then he changes into a different direction, throws a different chord change at you, a different progression, a different melody than you expected. So you're always going to get something a little bit unexpected with the Beatles. So going back to the procedure, right? I just went methodically, one after the other, A to Z. And it also, made me realize quite a few things along the way. I talk about that in my other video in case you're interested in talking, in learning more about what you get out of this process. But you certainly get a deeper appreciation of the Beatles' music. So going back to the method, right? You get the song down. I would usually play it 2 or 3 times without recording it, just to get it down, just to feel like it was smooth. And then I would start recording. And again, it usually took me 2 or 3 times to get it down, 2 or 3 takes, to get it down smooth enough that I was satisfied. I wasn't striving for perfection, because to do that could take a dozen or more takes, or you might have to learn little bits and practice them day after day. There are complicated songs in the Beatles repertoire that you definitely would have to learn beforehand. You can't just go into it cold. Like, there are songs involving a lot of serious guitar, finger style guitar work, like Blackbird, like Here Comes the Sun. Fortunately, I had learned all those songs many years ago and had been playing them over the years. So, and again, not striving for perfection. Ask any musician to play Blackbird in front of a crowd, and to play it as well as Paul does in the recording. They're going to be like, oh no, that would take me a long time to get that down. So yeah, we're not striving for perfection here, but trying to at least get it smooth, make it feel like a song. It's got the flow of the original song. And sometimes the imperfections can be charming too. That's kind of my other point. But you do want to get the rhythm and the flow. And I think, the other challenging thing is, but this goes back to kind of basic guitar skills and singing skills, is singing while you're playing guitar. I don't have any specific advice about that. That's a whole nother topic. But if you're a person like me who has spent many years playing guitar while singing, then you have the competence to take on the entire Beatles repertoire. It might take me, quite a few tries, first a few rounds of practice of a song, and then getting some of the tricky bits down if I was going for a riff, and then recording it. It would take maybe, on average 3 takes before I was satisfied with it. For some of the songs that I was a lot more used to playing might only take 1 take. But I think because the Beatles songs are complicated and there's always something to throw you off, I would give yourself, at least 3 takes of each song. So if you can do that and you go through song after song, and you try to be systematic about it, for me it just became a discipline. Usually in the morning, I found it was best to do this in the morning if I had time, because you have energy, you've had your cup of coffee, you're going to put 90 minutes into this task of playing 3 Beatles songs smoothly. If you can do that, then like I said, you can finish this entire book in the span of maybe 3 months. But you really have to put in the work every day. I did this 7 days a week, maybe even 8 days a week. I was learning Beatles songs or relearning them or just practicing them, getting them ready to record. And then the final step for me was to, and this was kind of the fun part for me, was once I had recorded the song, always, playing guitar while singing, never recording just guitar and then recording voice over that. It was always playing guitar while singing. And then I would have that recording. And sometimes I would then go to my GarageBand on my Mac, and I would lay down another track, a harmony track. I would harmonize vocally, usually from memory, although sometimes I would have to go back and listen to the song to see how they were harmonizing with each other. But I think if you're a Beatles fan, you'd be surprised at how locked in those harmonies are in your brain. So usually I was able to remember the harmony. For me, I have training in choral groups. I was a choral singer in college, so I had a lot of training in vocal harmonies. So that helped a lot too, I think. But I think it just goes back to listening to these songs since I was a child, and those harmonies are such a beautiful and essential part of so many Beatles songs and the character of the song. So I would go through, and usually it was just doing a one harmonic line to the main vocals, the way that Paul would have harmonized with John, or vice versa. So usually it was either Paul harmonizing at a higher register or John at a lower to Paul. Sometimes there's 3-part harmony when George gets into the picture. And then you really have to listen and figure out, because then you're getting into like Crosby, Stills, and Nash territory where you've got a 3-part harmony weaving together. And that can be very tricky. But it's also the fun part. So I certainly didn't do that with all of the songs that I recorded, but quite a few I added some vocal harmonies. And then sometimes I would, if there was a well-recognized solo bit, one of George's guitar solos in the middle, or even a piano piece, George Martin's piano in the middle, I would use my melodica just to replicate that solo as best I could, rather than using guitar, partly for variety, but also because it was just a little bit easier to do it with my melodica. And I would add that element in. And I think that was basically it. And so I did that for, I made a decision for every song whether I was going to add layers to it. And then the final stage is to, create the final video and load it up onto YouTube, which I did. So being a newbie, I'm sure I made all kinds of mistakes. The kind of mistakes that the guys who run YouTube channels about making YouTube videos will tell you not to make this mistake, not to make that mistake. But, nothing was at stake for me. I'm not in this for the money, obviously. Building my channel has been a totally a kind of an addition to my discipline and my practice of learning music and sharing the music I'm learning and my process with the world, in case it's a benefit to anybody out there. So if this is a benefit to you, I would appreciate a comment. I would appreciate you letting me know. If this got you to think about either doing this Beatles project or any other project, you could do this with, any other band that you know and love. I'm doing it with Bob Dylan right now, but I'm going album by album, not songs alphabetically. That would be a little too tedious, I think. But album by album is a nice alternative. I'd love to do this with some other great musicians that I know and love, like David Bowie, like Pink Floyd. I've already done this somewhat with the Rolling Stones. I've put more than 50 Rolling Stones songs on my YouTube channel. So I think there's a method and a process, and I think what you're going to get out of it is a lot of practice, a lot of training, a lot of discipline, and a lot of knowledge about the bands that you love, about the musicians that you love, about their styles, about their techniques, their songwriting skills. I think that's the other thing that you're going to get out of it. So if you are an aspiring songwriter, this can also be a very good thing to do. So that's all I'm going to say for today. I hope this video was helpful. Please like, comment, and subscribe. See you next time.